Okay, time for questions and answers. Now that I've pontificated, it's your turn. Everybody has this. We've got it on tape, right?
Not tape.
Video.
Real to real.
That dates me, doesn't it?
It's on solid state.
It's on solid state, yeah. I tell you, it's absolutely amazing. I thought I was really techie, and I was for 30 or 40 years. Now I'm just challenged. I can hardly keep up with the technology. I try to use it, but mostly it baffles me anymore. Does that date me? Anyway, question.
All right, if you had this whole set of experiences to do over again, in hindsight, what would you do any differently? Or would you do anything differently? If you knew all that you do now, all over the past 30, 40 years, or even 20 years, what would you change a little bit or decisions?
I would do one of two things. I probably wouldn't do one of them. One of them would be to just say nothing. Mm-hmm. And I could have become a real estate salesman or done something other with my time and effort and made a great deal more money and had a lot more fun. Or I would just do exactly the same thing I did. The odd thing about this, no one called me to this position. I had no revelation. That was my point in the lecture of talking about praying and looking for answers. There was no, oh, Anthony, here's what I want you to do with your life. There was none of that. I had to work it out with fear and trembling, if for want of a better term, to quote the scriptures. I had to figure it out as I went. But the odd thing is, with this information comes an obligation. And any one of you in this room that has delved deeply into this and steeped themselves in this, so to speak, has felt this very same urge. I need to tell somebody about this. It goes with the territory. I don't know why. Or maybe it's just me. Like I said, I am the keeper of odd knowledge.
I like sharing it.
We all do. Why? Because it gives us such exciting insights into the scriptures. You can pick up the book of Revelation or pick up Isaiah, the big puzzle, Isaiah, and you can read Isaiah and you know what he's talking about when he talks about the sides of the pit and what are some of the other, any number of references you can figure out knowing the archetypes. Let me just write that down because that's the key. Knowing the archetypes that came from cosmic events, what Nibley calls cosmism, knowing the archetypes that the whole world saw, every ancient culture saw, once you learn what they saw and how they perceived it, how they interpreted it, then you can understand what the prophets are talking about. You can understand the cosmology behind it. And that's the thing that, anyway, does that answer your question? Probably more than you wanted to know. Stephen.
So which one of your favorite stories as you're reading the church history that kind of shows the cosmology? Because you said there's a few of them. Which one's your favorite?
The first vision is my favorite.
Okay.
And not because it has direct connections to cosmism. It's because the Savior didn't mince words when he appeared to Joseph Smith. He said, join none of the churches because they're all wrong. And what I see modern Latter-day Saints doing is going after their interpretations. Yeah. Because there's a dearth of interpretive material in the church. The church does not publish any real effort outside of McConkie. No general authority has published much on biblical or prophetic interpretation. There's Dwayne Crowther and what's his name?
Skousen.
Cleon Skousen, thank you, and a couple of others. But mainstream Christianity is full of people who are telling you what the books of Revelation and other prophecies are all about. So Latter-day Saints, seeing this dearth of information in the church, look elsewhere for answers. And the Savior told Joseph Smith, believe none of it. Only we kind of miss that message because, well, sure, we don't baptize the way the Baptists or the evangelicals or the Adventists or the any of the Protestant churches baptize. The Catholic Church, we baptize differently. Why? Because it's been clearly explained to us. The purpose of the crucifixion and the resurrection, the sacrament, the temple rituals, all the endowment, all of this stuff sets us apart from the rest of Christianity. But it seems obvious to me that we've drifted away. And that's why I say the first vision where Christ told Joseph, believe none of it. They're teaching the precepts of men. And I don't think they've improved on that in the 150, 60, 70 years since the first vision. But they're every aspect of the gospel, Stephen. The 133rd section of Doctrine and Covenants, the 88th section, the 84th section, just loaded with this cosmological imagery, which is proof in my mind that Joseph Smith was a prophet. You know, all these pretenders that popped up since Joseph Smith, most of them use polygamy as their whipping horse. What's the word? That's their reason for. They say the church has backed away from polygamy, and and a lot of them claim revelation. None of them use this cosmic imagery because they don't know anything about it. So when someone comes up to you and says, oh, look, the Lord has revealed to me that this, and this is going to happen, you know? And you say, okay, let me see what you've written. And you read it and there's no cosmic imagery. It's because they didn't get revelation. It's coming out of their own brain somewhere. It certainly isn't coming from the Lord. You know, the Jewish test for a prophet is wait to see if his prophecies come true. And a lot of LDS scholars have said the very same thing. That's how you test it. Joseph Smith prophesied this, and they go to the Civil War and other things. There's an immediate test, and this is it. If a prophet is familiar with these archetypes and uses this imagery freely, as Joseph Smith did, then he understands it. And the only way he can know it is by revelation or by studying really hard like I do. Most people don't have Asperger's like I do, so they don't see it, they don't get fixated on it like I did. Okay? So that's the answer.
Well, one, I find it interesting that you bring up the first vision because I think has cosmological elements to it. And
well, I didn't say it didn't. I
Yeah,
just said that the really important part is what Christ told Joseph Smith. All the churches are wrong.
Yeah. Well, and then you go read First Nephi, and I guess you could call it Lehi's first vision, and there's many parallels in that one. There's many points in that are said that if you don't have this imagery in mind, it makes no sense. Or you take Ezekiel, right? His wheel within his wheels inside wheels, or circles inside of circles. It's those three circles with the three planets that you had on on the board earlier.
Don't give away my classes now,
okay.
Steve.
Sorry. It just, all these weird images, it's the only thing that makes it all click, rather than some runoff ideas for this one, and then one for that one, and one for this other one. This is the only one I've found that it makes them just all click.
Lehi and Nephi's vision of the tree of life is a perfect example of using this cosmic imagery. We, as Latter-day Saints, because we're never exposed to it, we think, oh, Lehi and Nephi invented this, or the Lord invented it and revealed it to them. It's new. It's not new. Every ancient culture had a tree of life.
Yeah, there's parts of it in the, is it the 16th chapel? Or
In the Sistine Chapel,
Yeah, the Sistine
in the Nordic
It's all over
tradition,
the
it's
place.
Yggdrasil. The tree of life is one of the oldest cosmological images known to mankind. And Lehi and Nephi took it and adapted it to their situation to try to teach their descendants what was important, what wasn't. Which means that most of the Nephites and Lamanites that came, or most of the group that came over with them, had understood culturally, understood these archetypes nicely. That's why Lehi and Nephi were able to use it. They were speaking in their language. And we see these as original ideas with them, and they're not. They're old ideas. All of it. Older than the civilizations that we see associated with it. Older than the Book of Mormon. Another one is the Daniel's image of the figure, the standing figure. This symbol is what was used, that Daniel was referencing in this figure. And the colors that he associated with it are all traditional. Anyway, that gets into the lessons, and I'm not going to try to do that. But that's the answer. See,
Yeah, it
once
fits that.
you know the original symbol and how it looked, then you can understand. And nobody tries to explain why he uses these colors. They're all quick to tell you, well, it represents various kingdoms because that's what he said. But the word kingdom in his vernacular, not ours, doesn't mean the same thing. The kingdom was part of this image. They're not earthly kingdoms. Sure, it fits. You take a certain segment of Western history and put it in there, and it fits, but it doesn't fit Oriental history. It doesn't fit Polynesian history. It just fits what we used to call WASP history. White, Anglo-Saxon, whatever WASP represented, you know. Anyway, I guess it probably more than answer your question.
No, that's good.
Another question here?
Okay, unless somebody else has one.
Go right ahead. I'm not seeing any other hands right now.
According to all your research, do you have any feeling if mankind is close to the end of times, or
Nope.
what's going on?
Actually, the reason I think we are indeed living in the last days comes from the Book of Mormon. It doesn't come from interpreting prophecy. Trying to set a timetable. There was a minister named William Miller in Joseph Smith's day that used Daniel and Revelation and Ezekiel and Isaiah and several others to come up with the date of 18, was it 42? Somewhere in that ballpark, 41, as the day the Savior was going to appear. He started the Adventist movement, which is today Seventh-day Adventists, Jehovah's Witnesses, okay? And Joseph Smith knew him and spoke about him, said, Miller's wrong because there isn't enough information in the Bible to determine that. Later, Joseph had his own vision, And he couldn't figure out what it actually meant. He says, whether it means I'll die and see the second coming in the Spirit, or whether I'll live another, whatever number, 1880, and see it in person. He said, I can't figure it out. I can't tell you. Even Joseph Smith didn't try to set a timetable. It's a mistake to try to do that. It's a mistake. This is what the Christian ministers try to do. Question here and then here. Steve?
When you were talking about Daniel's dreams,
Right.
when you said that it didn't fit histories, what did you mean by that?
I meant it doesn't fit other worldviews from other cultures. It doesn't fit the Chinese history.
But if it's not has anything to do with particularly their history, if it has to do with something else, how would it fit their history? It wouldn't fit their history. It has nothing to do with their history.
Well, that's my point. If it's scripture, why would Daniel use an analogy that was restricted just to
Well, it's the same
Western
thing
culture?
if you go to any Old Testament story, Old Testament of anything, those were written by Jews. You can extrapolate from it to your life or to your situation, but it has to do with the history, of that particular culture or time. And you wouldn't be able to transpose. You could transpose it in the sense of whatever it teaches, but you're not going to be able to transpose the actual whatever that Isaiah or Daniel was saying.
Yeah.
If Daniel was saying, look, this is when the gospel is going to be restored to the earth, has nothing to do with the Oriental people or with the Middle Eastern people. It has to do with the people that's going to come to pass to. Now they can take that for information because it's going to be relevant to them in that regard.
There's no harm in applying the imagery that way, okay? But it's a very narrow view. It's not a broader view. It doesn't make it wrong. It just means Joseph Smith did the same thing. Part of Daniel's vision, he said, I saw a stone cut out of a mountain, and the stone rolled forth and filled the whole world. Joseph says, oh, that's about the restoration. This is a prophet putting a modern interpretation to an ancient cosmological image. Lehi and Nephi say, well, there's this tree of life and there's this river and there's rod of iron. That's a prophet applying this ancient imagery to their particular dispensation. So the same thing with Daniel and this image. The origin of the image is here. This is the original meaning. Applying it in another way is perfectly all right. It is just a limited interpretation. It doesn't get the whole thing. Question here.
I haven't read World's Inclusion, the Velikovsky book yet, but if the way I understand it, Talbot was the first to piece the mythology together into the understanding the polar configuration, but did Velikovsky, he never saw it that way. The way he was just planets coming out of orbit and we've just been otherwise the same way we were, right?
Yeah.
Did he ever understand a polar configuration?
The words polar configuration never came out of his mouth. That's Talbot's contribution.
Talbot, okay.
But Velikovsky wrote an unpublished manuscript in which he indicated, I think it's published now, you can read it online, and he says, Saturn is the oldest planetary god of mankind, and it was the origin of all of this mythology. And that's what set Talbot off on his research, which ultimately came up with the book, The Saturn Myth, and the thesis that he lives with today. Was there another question? I saw, yes.
It seems to me that the most profound work you've done that has application to the Latter-day Saints is parallel histories. What's the backstory on that?
I'm glad you asked. How much time have I got, Stephen?
Until they come. You're fine.
once you understand the cosmic archetypes, you see the parallelism in the scriptures. The prophets often teach using parallelism. I'm put in mind of President Hinckley. A number of years ago, maybe 10 years ago, maybe a little more, in a priesthood session, said, I'm not prophesying anything, but he said, I want to bring to mind or have you recall Joseph in Egypt and his vision of the 7 years of plenty and the 7 years of famine. And then he said, I lived through a depression. And of course, we know one of the primary hallmarks of the depression was food shortages. My mother told me how much her family suffered. I mean, she would go sometimes skip 2 and 3 meals because they didn't have enough money. She lived in Cache County. That was one of the primary features. And President Hinckley said, I'm not prophesying anything. I just want the Latter-day Saints to be aware. He cited the famine picture. He cited the depression picture and said, we really need to be ready for this thing. That's one example. He cited something from the past to indicate to us what might happen in the future. Parallelism. That's what all this cosmic imagery is all about. So when we get to the Book of Mormon, there is the primary message, which we all read and understand. But there's a meta message. And it is this same parallelism. Mormon is compiling his culture's history. And he's read Nephi's dream, in which Nephi's describing things coming up through history. Christ teaches the gospel, the word goes from the Jew to the Gentile gets it, a great and abominable church comes up, and both the great and abominable church and the Gentiles distort the truth, and then the angel says, stop. You can write no more. Somebody else is going to write about that. So Mormon knows this. He says, I've seen your day, Gentiles. I know what you're going to do. So what choice does he have? He can use the prophetic standard of parallelism. He says, read our history. Wouldn't it have been easier, and he had to make a lot fewer plates, if he just wrote down the gospel principles and left it at that? Why belabor their history? Why rehearse their history? Just cultural egotism? No, there's a message there. He says, learn from us. Don't make our same mistake. Of course, he knows we're going to. He's seen our time. So what does that turn the Book of Mormon into?
Prophecy.
The big P word. Prophecy. It's telling us what's going to happen in our time and how to maybe avoid it. Of course, because we don't avoid it, it becomes a blueprint for our time. And we can see what's going to happen in our world in the future based on reading what happened to the Nephites. So once you master this, the archetypes business, you see that there is this parallelism in all the prophets' teachings, and it becomes very easy to see it as history, see the meta message, and discern what's going to happen in our time. And that was the story of the parallel histories. That's why I wrote it. It all this connects the gospel in ways that we never imagined. It makes it all an integral one, instead of a book over here and a book over there and a vision here and a vision there. It connects everything. It connects us to our ancient culture. That's what our temple rituals are. Our temple rituals are rehearsals of not the endowment, okay, not the covenants. You could go into the temple and make those covenants in 10, 15 minutes and leave. But while the clothing and the ritual and in the live performance, why moving from room to room? Why do we do this? Why do we do the things that we do in the temple? We're rehearsing this stuff right here, and we don't even know it. How can I say that? Because the very same thing that's on the outside of the temples, symbols, the very same thing that's on the outside of the temples, stars, moons, suns, constellations. That's a big dipper, by the way. And on the roof of the conference center, thank you, Stephen.
Well, then you got your Saturn stones on the Salt Lake Temple.
In the original drawings, that's right, Saturn stones, pictures of Saturn.
Well, they're there. They're just
a planet,
not as artistic.
A planet with two rings around it like that. See, that's this meta message. What we see is a vehicle to convey information. And we don't get any information from it because we've not been trained in the background. It'd be like taking a Martian and trying to teach him the story of Christmas. We all know the story of Christmas. You draw a picture of Santa Claus, and any kid 4 or 5 years old can tell you the whole story. Well, he lives in the north and he makes gifts and he has elves in a sleigh and he comes around at Christmas and comes down the chimney and da-da, 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 da-da. They know the story and all of its variations. Oh, and yeah, the Christmas tree, and they know it all. And that's how the ancients saw this stuff. These were the traditional stories. The prophets weren't using mystical, hidden, mysterious symbols at all. They were using concepts that were familiar to their audience. The reason it's mysterious to us is because we've not been trained in this stuff. The reason the temple is that way, we've not been trained in this stuff. We've been told it's demonic or New Age or pagan. Yeah, it's pagan, all right. Oh, they're going to tell us something. Time to go?
Yeah, if you can wrap it up within the next few minutes.
I'm going to wrap it up in 30 seconds.
Okay.
Thanks. Anyway, I appreciate your attendance. I'm passionate about this stuff. Forgive me if I overstep my bounds sometimes, but I rejoice that I've been able to discover this. I am and always will be eternally grateful that I could understand it. And because I rejoice in this information, I want as many people as possible to understand it as well. And that's my sole motivation. I hope you'll pay attention. This is my last lecture. I don't know when I'll do another one. So, as in the BYU series, if I was going to die tomorrow, this is the things that I'd want to say to you. Learn this, because this is as much a part of the gospel of Jesus Christ as the resurrection. And if you can't see that, you haven't studied it enough. Thank you.
Thank you.